in the original release of Final Fantasy VII, and like my previous videos, this will be an analysis of how these characters were crafted back in the original release of the game, not how they have been changed, expanded, or rewritten in the various sequels, spin-offs, and remakes since. Anyway, back in the original PlayStation 1 1997 release of Final Fantasy VII, Cloud's character follows a very similar character arc to Sephiroth. If you've seen my video examining Sephiroth, you'll know that I believe his character is all about the theme of identity. Sephiroth begins his story perceiving himself a certain way, as a cold and cool master swordsman employed by the Shinra Electric Power Company. Then he experiences a traumatic event, a psychological shock to his system, and his identity shatters. He discovers that he was not born but created, that he is not human but something else. He reconstructs his identity based on these revelations, and that imperfect reconstruction leads to a violent insanity, sending him on the calamitous journey which sets the entire grand epic adventure of Final Fantasy VII into motion. In a very similar way, Cloud's own identity is shattered and reconstructed multiple times over the course of the story. However, unlike Sephiroth, Cloud is not alone. Both times when he reconstructs his identity, he has Tifa by his side, and through his grounding relationship with her, he eventually, after a lot of trauma and heartache, reaches a healthy and positive equilibrium that allows him to finally become the true hero he was always meant to be. So what I'm going to do in this video is follow Cloud's story in Final Fantasy VII from beginning to end, from his stylish introduction in Midgard to his climactic final battle with Sephiroth, to examine how the writers crafted this character. To keep this video down to a reasonable length, because if I'm not careful, this could easily become like a 2-hour-long essay that never gets done. It's already taken me way too long to finish. Anyway, I'm breaking Cloud's story down into 7 sections. First, Midgar. Second, the flashback in Nibelheim. Third, the Temple of the Ancients. Fourth, the City of the Ancients. Fifth, the Northern Crater. Sixth, Lost in the Lifestream. And seventh, the final battle. And at each of these stages, I want to discuss what choices the writers are making with his character and why. Okay, so let's start at the start, with his time in the dystopian, futuristic city of Midgar. In some ways, I think Cloud's story follows a very complete story arc right here in the first section. He begins as a cold, unfeeling, selfish mercenary who only cares about himself, and ends it by choosing to selflessly fight to save his friends, fighting to do the right thing, already becoming something of a hero. In his very first scene, Cloud comes off as super duper cool. The first time you see him, he's doing somersaults off this train, just annihilating these 2 guards. He's clearly shown to be a far stronger fighter than any of these other characters. The writers want you to be impressed, they want you to be enamored, they want you to think, whoa, this guy's pretty dope. The opening of Final Fantasy VII is famous, and for good reason. It is an exciting, explosive, fast-paced, and cinematic start to this adventure. Cloud is fighting alongside a group called Avalanche, who are eco-terrorists and freedom fighters battling to save the planet from the dastardly and exploitative designs of the evil Shinra Electric Power Company, corporate overlords of the dystopian city of Midgar. But Cloud claims to not care about Shinra or Avalanche. He says over and over again that he's just here for a paycheck. He's a mercenary here to do a job and nothing more. However, as soon as this first mission is successfully completed, that cold exterior already shows its first signs of cracking, because Cloud has a much closer, warmer, and more personal relationship with the as yet unseen 5th member of Avalanche, Tifa Lockhart. At this point in the story, the player is led to believe that these two were childhood friends. We are shown a flashback in which we see them as children, looking up at the stars together, and a young Cloud declares that he will leave town, join Soldier, and then return to protect Tifa. Future revelations, though, will change our understanding of their relationship. In the present, Cloud is portrayed to be something other than human. He is supposedly a former member of Soldier, Shinra's elite private military division, whose members are physically and magically altered by radical experimentation and extreme exposure to dangerous Mako energy. Inhuman and estranged from the rest of society, Cloud's sole connection to humanity is Tifa. Without her, he would be alone. At the start of the story, Tifa's role is to keep him grounded, to serve as a connection to his past and to his lost humanity. Later, he gains a second connection to not just humanity, but to the Earth itself in the form of Aerith. After his second mission with Avalanche, Cloud falls down into the slums and awakens among a bed of flowers, the first plants we've ever seen in the industrial artificial wasteland of Midgar, and he is awoken by a girl named Aerith. She is the archetypical beautiful and pure young maiden, a young woman in need of rescue. She symbolizes innocence and youth, remaining optimistic no matter how terrible the circumstances are, and always choosing to do the right thing. Her role in the story is to be a positive and nourishing influence on not only Cloud, but on all of the characters. She represents what is good in the world in the same way that Sephiroth represents all that is wrong. But of course, she turns out to be a lot more than just her archetype. Aerith is not just some powerless maiden, she's actually one of the most powerful characters in the story. She is the last living member of an ancient race known as the Cetra, a people who had a unique, empathetic, and symbiotic relationship with nature. Again and again, it will be Aerith who pushes Cloud towards embracing the better parts of himself, fighting for what is right, and fighting for the planet too. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. Back in Midgar, Cloud's cold, unfeeling mask continues to crack when he discovers that Tifa has seemingly been kidnapped by a gangster overlord. He and Aerith mount a comical and ridiculous cross-dressing rescue. Not long after, there is another kidnapping. This time, Aerith is taken by Shinra, and Cloud once again leads a daring rescue attempt, and this time he does not wear a dress. These two episodes make it very clear that, whatever Cloud might claim, he really does care about the people around him. When his friends are in trouble, he is willing to put himself in great danger to help them. The Midgar section of the game ends by revealing the identity of the story's true villain, Sephiroth, elite soldier, master swordsman, hero of the Shinra Wutai War, a man who supposedly died several years before and has suddenly returned on a mysterious mission of violence and destruction. Sephiroth becomes the new focus of Cloud's story. Our hero is going to spend the rest of the game pursuing this villain across the world, across vast oceans and distant lands, and his journey will not be over until Sephiroth has been vanquished. For the second section of this video, we are going to discuss Cloud's flashback. Okay, so after departing Midgar, our characters regroup at a nearby town, and there, Cloud explains what happened to him and Sephiroth at his hometown of Nibelheim 5 years ago. In my Sephiroth video, I spent a lot of time dissecting this flashback, examining how Sephiroth's identity is shattered by what he learns in both the Mako reactor and in the secret research lab beneath the Shinra mansion, and how he then radically reconstructs a new destructive identity in response to these revelations. I don't want to repeat any of that here. Instead, we are going to stay focused on what is revealed about Cloud's character. The flashback begins in the back of a Shinra military transport truck, and we witness a Cloud who is very different from the one we know in the present. We are introduced to a character who is youthful and exuberant and so full of energy and excitement that he is practically bouncing off the walls. This is his first real mission, and he is clearly extremely excited to be in the presence of a master warrior. In a short combat section, it is demonstrated just how much stronger Sephiroth is than Cloud. Sephiroth is able to slay this dragon in like 2 hits, while Cloud barely even scratches it. It is also possible to speak with one of the unnamed grunts in the truck, and it turns out that they are doubled over with car sickness, and Cloud brazenly claims that he has never suffered from motion sickness. This is a fascinating little moment that is easy to miss, because eventually it will be revealed that Cloud's memories of this event have been warped. He was never a member of Soldier at all. He was the nameless, faceless grunt riding in the background, the one doubled over with car sickness. The loser, the weakest and least impressive member of the group. He has told this story in such a way as to appear tougher, more skilled, and less of a loser than he actually was. However, Cloud is not being deceptive on purpose here. He has reconstructed his identity to become someone new, but we'll talk about all that more later. Eventually, they reach the Nibelheim reactor, and Sephiroth has a violent freakout when he learns something shocking about his own past, which leads him to have an identity crisis and then to seek revenge against all humans. He burns Nibelheim to the ground and slaughters all of its residents, including all of Cloud's old family and friends, and he badly wounds Tifa too. It cannot be overstated how horrific and traumatic an event this was for Cloud, and even worse, because it wasn't just some random dude who did this. It was his mentor, his hero, the person he looked up to, the person he most wanted to be like, who committed these horrific acts. Afterwards, Cloud follows Sephiroth to the Mako reactor to confront him. He has no chance in this battle, and he knows it. We've already seen how much more powerful Sephiroth is than him. That's one of the things that makes Cloud a hero. Even when faced with insurmountable odds, he still chooses to fight. But here his memory fails him. He does not remember what happened next or how their confrontation concluded. The audience does not learn the rest of this story until much later in the game. For now, it is enough to know that in the present, Sephiroth, whatever his plans are, must be stopped. Next, we are going to discuss what happens to Cloud at the Temple of the Ancients. To get there, we have to skip over a pretty sizable chunk of the story. There is a lot we could discuss here, like the way Cloud gradually becomes the leader of this ragtag group of eccentrics and outcasts, the way he keeps choosing to do the right thing, the way he grows closer and closer to Aerith over the course of the journey. But if we get bogged down in the details, this video will never end. To sum it up, all you need to understand is that during this section of the story, Cloud acts the part of the stereotypical hero. He does everything that a good guy should do. It feels like his character growth is already complete, which is why the events at the Temple of the Ancients are so shocking. Inside the temple, our heroes finally catch up to Sephiroth, who reveals his dastardly and insane plan. He is going to use something called the Black Materia to summon a meteor from outer space to strike the Earth. Then, as the planet tries to magically heal itself, he is going to absorb its energy, transforming himself into a godlike being. But none of that really matters to this analysis. What matters to us now is that as soon as Cloud learns of this plan, he begins to behave very, very strangely. He laughs and mutters to himself in the exact same hysterical way as Sephiroth, before being brought back to reality by his friends. This is the first time the audience will see hints that there is something very wrong with Cloud, that he is not just the stereotypical hero he has so far been presented to be. It gets even crazier when they actually manage to acquire the Black Materia. Sephiroth suddenly reappears and he orders Cloud to hand it over. Then, to the shock of everyone, including himself, Cloud actually does it. He follows Sephiroth's orders. He willingly and without protest gives the villain the means to destroy the entire planet. At this point, there are actually two Clouds on screen. The adult version we've been following all along, and a child version who appears to emerge from his body. The adult version hands over the Black Materia, while the child version begs him to stop. What's happening here is that the developers are trying to show us visually the way this character's identity is splitting in half. There is a part of Cloud which wants to resist the villain, but that part of him is weak and small. And it gets even worse. In a truly horrific moment after Sephiroth flees, Cloud turns on Aerith. He leaps on top of her and begins savagely beating her. One of his closest friends, the girl who has been pushing him to be his best self all this time. The kind kindest and most empathetic character in the game. In my eyes, this is the moment that Final Fantasy VII transforms into a genuinely fascinating story. Before, this game seemed like a pretty generic good guys versus bad guys fantasy epic, but afterwards it becomes just as much a story about Cloud struggling against himself, against the worst parts of his own identity, as it does a story about him struggling against Sephiroth. Next, we're going to move on to what happens at the City of the Ancients. At this point in the story, the focus of the narrative shifts towards Aerith. After the horrific events at the temple, she disappears, and so instead of chasing after Sephiroth, the heroes pursue her. But when he finally does find her, disaster strikes. In one of the most shocking twists in video game history, Sephiroth suddenly descends from the sky and stabs her in the back, killing her instantly. Afterwards, Sephiroth launches into an insane monologue about how it does not matter, because her life energy will return to the planet and so on and so forth. But Cloud interrupts him, and pay really close attention to what he says here, because it's some of the most important dialogue in the game. He says, "The cycle of nature and your stupid plan don't mean a thing. Aerith is gone. She will no longer talk, no longer laugh, cry, or get angry. What about us? What are we supposed to do? What is this pain? My fingers are tingling, my mouth is dry, my eyes are burning." While the writing here is sort of blunt, it's lacking in subtlety, I find this to be one of the most moving scenes in the game, and I think it's just as affecting today as it was back in its original release. Cloud's emotions are really raw here. His anguish, his sense of loss, his confusion, they all come through very clearly, even if it's a bit inelegant by today's standards. Something that makes Cloud a great character is how deeply human and sympathetic he is. In this dialogue, he is touching on two different themes. First, the tremendous value of an individual human life, the incredible loss when any one person passes away, and also the trauma felt by those who are left behind. This is the second time that Cloud has lost someone he loved, and the emotions he feels are so terrible and so overwhelming that they are affecting his body in a really dramatic way. He begins describing this physical reaction he has to her death, and it's clear he doesn't quite understand it, doesn't know how to deal with it. In this scene, Cloud completes his first character arc. At the beginning of the game, he acted as if he did not care about anyone but himself, but now he is utterly devastated by the death of Aerith. He realizes for the first time just how important his relationship with her was to him. He is no longer able to pretend not to care anymore. That performance is over. Moving forward, his character is going to follow a different arc. This time, he is going to go on a journey of identity, of self-discovery. By the end of the second arc, he will discover who he really is. That journey begins at the Northern Crater. Okay, so the heroes follow Sephiroth to the northernmost point on the planet, a frozen wasteland and the site of an ancient crater. All of these figures in black cloaks have gathered here too, and they are all either dropping dead of exhaustion or being killed by Sephiroth. The game refers to these guys as Sephiroth clones. They are the results of experiments by Hojo, the head of the Shinra Research Division, who is attempting to recreate Sephiroth. Each of them was injected with Jenova cells, and now Sephiroth and Jenova have summoned them here to the north to return those cells to their original source, so Jenova can be fully reborn. These clones are shown to be very weak-willed. They are easily dominated and commanded by Sephiroth. When he orders them to die, they do so willingly, just like Cloud willingly handed over the black materia. At one point during these confrontations, Sephiroth draws Cloud into a sort of dream world, in which we see another version of the events at Nibelheim. We learn that Cloud's version of the story is false. Sephiroth was actually accompanied by a young soldier named Zack. As far as anyone can tell, Cloud was not present at all, or at least that's how it seems at this point of the story. Sephiroth claims that Cloud is just another clone, another experiment created by Hojo, and worse than that, a failed experiment. little more than a broken toy, not even worthy of being given the official numbered designation that all the rest have. Sephiroth also claims that all of Cloud's memories are false, that they are really just figments of Tifa's imagination, that she imagined a certain version of Cloud in her head, and then this science experiment somehow merged with those imaginations, constructing false memories to match her perception of him, thus becoming this fake version of Cloud. It's pretty convoluted and confusing. At first, Cloud rejects all of this, believing it to be a trick being played on him by the villain, but as the evidence mounts, he becomes more and more confused and upset. He turns to Tifa and he begs her to tell him that this is not true, but she is not able to reassure him, because she is not certain of the truth herself. Without her grounding influence, Cloud experiences a total psychological breakdown. His identity is shattered. He does not know who he is anymore or what his purpose is. In the following scene, desperately searching for a new purpose, he begs Hojo to assign him an experiment number, to give him some form of identity. But Hojo refuses, accusing him of being a failure unworthy of his attention. Feeling lost and confused, Cloud once again hands the black materia over to Sephiroth, dooming the entire planet. He no longer even tries to resist Jenova's influence, because he no longer possesses any independent will with which to resist. At this point in the story, Cloud hits absolute rock bottom. He has lost everything. He lost Aerith, he lost Tifa, he even lost his sense of self. He disappears from the story for a couple hours after this. For a while, this becomes a story about Tifa instead, but eventually she finds a deeply wounded Cloud at a town called Midiel. He has undergone a complete transformation. He is physically weak and totally incoherent. He behaves in the exact same way as the figures in the black cloaks from before, rambling nonsense, wandering aimlessly. For a while, it seems as if there is no way to save him. Tifa chooses to stay behind to care for him, while the rest of the heroes continue their journey. There's a whole section of Final Fantasy VII where basically the entire main cast is absent. Aerith is dead, Cloud is incapacitated, and Tifa is busy playing nurse. Instead, you exclusively follow all these supporting characters while they go on their own adventure. It's actually a really unusual turn in the story. I've never seen anything quite like it before. I think the point of this section is to show how dysfunctional the group is without Cloud as its leader, how important and irreplaceable he is, how much they all rely on him. Eventually, we do return to the town of Midiel, which is attacked by a giant monster, and then both Cloud and Tifa fall into the life stream. There, Tifa is apparently pulled into his fractured subconscious. It turns out that he is not the expert soldier he first claimed to be. In a lot of ways, Cloud is actually just a normal guy. He's not some superhero, he's not some ultimate warrior, he is essentially just an ordinary dude who has been thrust into an extraordinary situation, and he has been dealing with all this trauma by pretending to be something he is not. To gain a better understanding of what's happening, we are going to take a closer look at each of the memories that are explored here. Cloud's subconscious is a strange, surreal space made up of scattered scenes throughout his life, and it is filled with many different clouds, meant to represent how his identity has been broken into many different pieces. By the end of this sequence, all of those different clouds will merge into one, symbolizing the final reconstruction of his true identity. The first memory we explore is of Nibelheim. Tifa claims that Cloud's memory is mistaken. He was not with Sephiroth back then. She never saw him, which suggests that maybe all of his memories are false, just like Sephiroth claimed. Except not, because then we see another flashback. This one of the promise Cloud made to Tifa when they were both children. And now Tifa confirms that this one really happened. This is a real memory, not just something he pulled from her imagination. This is meant to show the audience that some parts of Cloud's story are true. What these characters need to do is separate the true from the false. Next, we see a memory that takes place inside Tifa's childhood home. Here, it is revealed that Tifa and Cloud were never close friends as children. Cloud admired her from afar, but she was too busy with her own friends and her own personal tragedies to notice him. Even Tifa misremembered their childhood relationship, accidentally feeding into Cloud's false identity at the start of the game. We also see a flashback where Tifa and her friends try to climb Mount Nibel in search of her dead mother. On the climb, Tifa is injured in an accident, and it is Cloud who rescues her, showing that he has always been a hero, always someone who protected those he cared about, though he's the one who gets blamed for her injury, which is pretty lame. Next, for the 4th time, we return to the Nibelheim flashback. But this time, we finally see the true version of those events which took place 5 years ago. Shinra did send 2 elite soldiers to investigate the Nibelheim reactor. One of them was Sephiroth, the famous war hero and master swordsman, and the other was a guy named Zack Fair, a young, excitable, spiky-haired up-and-comer. They were accompanied by several low-level grunts, and one of those was Cloud. Despite his childhood promise, he failed to join Soldier. He just wasn't strong enough, wasn't skilled enough. He was embarrassed by this failure and hid his face underneath his helmet so Tifa would not recognize him. When Sephiroth went insane, destroyed Nibelheim, slaughtered its town people, and injured both Tifa and Zack, Cloud confronted him at the reactor, just like he claimed all the way back in the original flashback. And now we finally get to see what happened next. Incredibly, against all expectations, Cloud actually won that fight, defeated someone who should have been far stronger than him. Cloud is the one who killed the real Sephiroth, but he was grievously injured himself in the battle, and then was picked up by Shinra and subjected to brutal experiments by Hojo. This traumatic series of events caused his original identity to shatter. He escaped from Shinra but was left a broken man, who behaved in a very similar manner to the other Sephiroth clones. Tifa just happened to run into him and recognize him in Midgar, and then he latched onto her perception of him and mixed her memories with his own memories of Zack to construct a new identity, to create a version of himself who is strong enough to handle all of these terrible things that had happened to him. As I discussed in my previous videos, identity in Final Fantasy VII is a fraught affair. In this story, a false identity will always be inevitably destroyed by the truth, which is exactly what happened to Cloud. However, with Tifa's help, by sorting through his memories, understanding which were true and which were false, now he finally knows his true self. That he was never an elite soldier, that he and Tifa were not childhood friends, but that he is still a hero, that he is someone who chooses to do the right thing, even when it seems impossible, that he has always been someone who fights to protect others. With his true identity rediscovered, his second character arc is complete. All that's left to do is to make a final journey to the Northern Crater, confront Sephiroth, and defeat the villain once and for all. Cloud's third and final character arc has to do with strength and weakness. This game's story spends a lot of time portraying Cloud as a fundamentally weak character. Despite his apparent physical strength and combat prowess at the start of the game makes a point to show us again and again that he is far weaker than Sephiroth. He is easily dominated by the other man's greater will multiple times. And yet, despite all that supposed weakness, Cloud is able to tap into a truer form of strength that allows him to accomplish incredible things. He was the one who defeated Sephiroth back in Nibelheim when no one else could, and it is he who will defeat the villain again in single combat at the Northern Crater. So what is the explanation for this? If Cloud is too weak to join Soldier, and too weak to resist Sephiroth's will, and too weak to be anything other than a failure in Hojo's experiments, then how is he able to find the strength to ultimately defeat a villain as powerful as Sephiroth? The explanation can be found in the speech Cloud gives before the final battle. In that speech, he begins by telling Red 13 to return to his home of Cosmo Canyon and visit his family and friends there. He tells Barrett to visit Marlene, his adopted daughter. He asks, "What are we all fighting for?" It has to be something more than just saving the planet. They have to fight for something more personally meaningful than that. He says, "We are all fighting for ourselves and for someone or something else, whatever it is that is truly important to us." Barrett confirms that what he's really fighting for is Marlene's future. And then Cloud tells everyone to leave and find the thing that's really important to them before committing to this battle. In this dialogue, Cloud reveals that his incredible strength does not come from within. Instead, it comes from his relationships with others. He was able to defeat Sephiroth that first time because he was fighting for Tifa and for his family and for his home. He was able to overcome that trauma and restore his identity because he had Tifa's support. And this time, he won't just have Tifa, but he'll have all of his friends by his side. And Aerith's memory too. That is why he will be able to defeat Sephiroth again, even if he is technically physically weaker than the villain. After this speech, he and Tifa spend some time alone, and while it's not explicit, and the dialogue is more than a little bit clunky here, I always thought this scene was intended to portray them acknowledging their feelings for each other, showing just how much Cloud has changed from that cold, unfeeling mercenary who infiltrated the Mako reactor with Avalanche at the start of the story. In the end, after a grueling gauntlet and a crazy boss battle, Cloud defeats Sephiroth with a single swing of his sword. And in doing so, not only slays the villain, but thematically slays the worst parts of his own character too, the coldness and the lack of feeling. In the future, Cloud should become a character driven by emotion, who openly cares for the people around him, who is able to pursue meaningful relationships with others. Cloud is a great character specifically because he is not just the stereotypical cool fantasy hero he is first presented to be. His journey of self-discovery, transitioning through different false identities before finally rediscovering the true Cloud, is genuinely unique. I have not seen many other characters follow that kind of story arc before. It turns out that he was actually just someone pretending to be a stereotypical cool fantasy hero, whereas underneath he was just an ordinary guy, not unusually strong or extraordinarily skilled. He was broken by trauma and tragedy and then clung to a false sense of self to give him the strength he needed to survive. But in the end, it is not his own inner strength that transforms him into a true hero, but the strength he draws from those around him. Cloud is only a hero so long as he has Tifa and Aerith and Barrett and the rest by his side.